Hello, everybody. Welcome to our video series. We got a number of videos I've made here with none other than Will, and we will talk about that. But really, I have a YouTube channel and I do a lot of music, but I am also have an interest in a bigger picture. Why are we here? And what's the reason God put us on this earth and all those great things. So I am interested in that. Leon's very interested in that. Oh, see that? I called him that. I didn't call him Will. So let's before we go any further, Will. Who is Will? Do you want to talk about who is Will?
Yeah, this video kind of what should probably have been like the very first of a taste of Judaism because that is where you were introduced to Will with that video. And so people that probably don't know me, this is like irrelevant, but people that know me because they know me as Leon, like say at the church that I go to, but I call myself Will when I am really talking about maybe not spiritual, yeah, I guess spiritual things or the Bible. This is kind of a not a secret identity, but a different identity, or maybe because I want to talk about in the scriptures names. In the scriptures, that if there is someone's name as their essence or their mission in life, and so I kind of use that as the inspiration for Will, which is different than because I'm in a different place than I was many years ago. And so, like the interesting thing, I was telling Jeff that people probably know that Abraham, but his name prior to that was Abram, and God changed his name. He put a letter of his own name, the Hey in Hebrew, onto his name, and it went from Abram, which is exalted father, to Abraham, father of many nations. That should ring a bell in Paul's writings about Abraham being a father of many nations. And another place is Jacob, where people Jacob, his name really in Hebrew means heel, but sometimes people it's not even a mistranslation, but they say that his name means deceiver or swindler, and that's erroneous. It means heel. And so in that fight with the man, in the scripture says that Jacob's name went from Jacob to Israel. So anyway, so in the scriptures you have a history of changing of a name means a changing of destiny or a mission. And I mentioned to Jeff earlier that
Yeah, I'm Mike Dynamic now.
yeah, that
I'll stick with Jeff. I don't need to be Mike.
Yeah, that Joshua, that's not his name. That Moses changed his name from Hoshea to Yehoshua, which in Hebrew Yehoshua actually means the Lord saves. The same thing is in Hebrew. What Yeshua, his name means the same thing. It's just the masculine version of the Lord saves. So anyway, so that's the whole thing about the name change. And so on these videos, I just kind of jumped in just saying Will, but it was more in the sense of when I'm talking about the scriptures and kind of looking at it from a different perspective. That was kind of the persona that I was going with. So so someone doesn't have to think that they're being schizophrenic or anything like that between Leon and Will, who it's the same guy. What's the name?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Right. So now that we know a little bit about that, and so on prior videos, I talked a little bit. I guess it would be maybe more about my testimony, but I didn't do that with this taste of Torah, a taste of Judaism. But I think this is kind of like a good thing to kind of explain because that gives even more context to the whole thing about the Will name. And so for me, just in a nutshell, I grew up going to a church. I'm a preacher's kid. My father was a minister for many years, and so I grew up in the church and reading the Bible. And at one point, I decided that I knew a lot about the New Testament, but I was not very familiar with the Old Testament. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to read through the Old Testament. I kind of knew some of the stories and everything like that, but I wanted to actually like read it seriously. And so I didn't know where to begin. I first started in the beginning with Genesis. And so I read through that, and then I was thinking, okay, I wanted something different. Let's go to the book of Kings. And it's like Kings kind of like, it sounds like it'll be like an interesting story, very, Kings, wars, and everything like that. So I went to get a commentary, and I found a commentary, and then I saw another commentary, and it was the Jewish New Testament. And at that point, I was, what? Everyone knows that the New Testament is Christian. It's not Jewish. What is this? And so I picked up the commentary, and I just started reading the back of it. And then it was like, okay, I just was not really used to that. I never heard of the name Yeshua before. I just, being a Christian, Jesus and everything. So basically, I bought this commentary because I was like, it really piqued my interest, and I was reading through that. And at least for me, it like opened up this whole new world, because I never thought of these things that happen in the New Testament as having any sort of really relationship really with Jews or Judaism or anything like that. So I had all these questions. I knew that I couldn't ask my dad, although he's a minister, but this like more looking at it from a Jewish perspective, he wouldn't be able to help me. So I found a Messianic Jewish congregation. So I was there for many years, and at that point started to learn. I learned Hebrew and got commentaries that are Jewish commentaries like Rashi or Sforno or Ibn Ezra. These are like titans, if you will, in Judaism, and they are looking at the scriptures in its original language, Hebrew, and commenting on that and helping the reader to understand it. So that, if you will, that was Leon. And then in 2020, which my story in 2020 has been documented, especially on this channel, it's been not dissected, but it's been talked about. In 2020, I had contracted COVID, and it was a COVID-related pneumonia. So I was in the hospital for an extended amount of time, and on a do not resuscitate list. And there's a lot that's happened there. But a very interesting thing also with this story is that this happened like almost 3 years ago in 2020, but it happened during Passover. And that's like a very interesting thing, that if someone's familiar with these things, that I went in the hospital a little bit before Passover. Passover is really like a 7-day festival. Then there's the counting of the Omer, where you count 50 days from Passover. And then most people are familiar with Acts chapter 2. So Acts chapter 2 was 50 days after Yeshua's execution. And so all those things that happened to me happened within that time frame. So it's very very interesting about what happened with me during that time. So anyway, so if you will is the aftermath of what happened in 2020. And so from 1996 to 2020, where I'm just starting to learn Hebrew and learn about how the Old Testament has been used, and how that's the foundation of how the New Testament is built on Moses and the prophets. And so the New Testament can really be understood when one has the foundation of what's gone on before. Growing up in Christianity, it's more of the Genesis through Malachi, like nearly 3/4 of the Bible is not really explored, and we start with Matthew. But if you do that, the foundations are not there, and you end up just reading into texts what you might think, but because you don't have the foundation. And so anyway, so from 1996 until 2020, I was kind of like just starting this journey of like putting things back into the, context. And so then in 2020, with COVID and everything that happened, I feel like God is opening up a even larger world, in the sense of that, before I was learning all this information, now it's more of a practice, and it's that information that gone it's gone more than just information about XYZ to now living in a certain way. And at least for me, in the beginning, when I first found that book about the Jewish New Testament, and this one thing that I thought about, it was like, okay, if I am a follower of Yeshua, my life doesn't look anything like how he lived. And so that was really kind of an interesting concept, because back then I was thinking of, you have people that are like sports fans, and they will get like a jersey of their famous sports figure. And like when you put on that jersey, that's like you are really identifying with that sports hero. And so I was thinking the same thing, that, okay, if I follow Yeshua, but if my life doesn't, like basic things that my life doesn't mirror how he lived, that's kind of like a little weird to me. And I remember at the time thinking about, how can you say that you're a disciple of someone when you don't even look like or act like or behave like that person? So anyway, so that was kind of like the beginning. And so that's the beginning of Will, if you will. So I think, like in general, that maybe Jeff might bring it up too, that a lot of times, like even like in Christianity, they talk about the people want to learn about the Jewish roots of the faith, and or sometimes you'll hear that we want to get back to the New Testament church, and so there is a interest in understanding, especially like the New Testament in its actual authentic context, which is within Judaism of the first century. Kind of another thing on my journey, like another example, is most people are familiar with Paul and his writing on the spirit and the flesh, spirit and the flesh. And so I was reading a book called the Tanya, and it's very interesting that as I'm reading through the Tanya, although in that book it talks about the animal soul and the divine soul, and so I'm like reading through this, I'm like, this sounds so familiar. This sounds like what Paul is writing, except for Paul says the flesh, where the Tanya says the animal soul, and when Paul talks about the spirit, that the Tanya talks about the divine soul. And so it's like, they're like, basically, as time went on, they're talking about the same thing, because the same concept is very, it's something that is in Judaism. And so that was kind of like a very initial thing of that there is a connection between the two. And so this is kind of the, where I've been. So I think that in a lot of times in like things in the New Testament, I think that things are not properly understood, just mainly because we don't have the background. Most people aren't familiar with different concepts that we read about in the New Testament, and then we don't understand like the foundation of those things have their foundation in the Old Testament, as we say. So anyway, so that is kind of I think answering the question of who is Will. Who is Will is or Will, as I normally say, is not the persona, but the aspect of myself that when I'm studying scriptures, putting it back, especially like the New Testament, putting it back into its context and understanding it in that way. And I think but a lot of things that there are questions about, like certain passages that if they're put back in or understood in its original context, like those questions kind of melt away, because then you understand like what's being talked about. So yeah, so that's kind of who I am, and then that dovetails into I think we did like five sessions about the Taste of Judaism, talking about I think like the rapture. The other one was about the signs of the second coming. There was one about Ephesians 2, about the ingrafting of the Gentiles into Israel. So those are the ones that we did 5 of them. So anyway, so that is kind of the beginning of that, because I think I started that just saying my name is Will, and we're putting the New Testament back in its Jewish context, and then making Jesus Jewish again. I think that's how we started that one. So anyway, so at this point, we're going to go with a Q&A
or some kind of discussion at least, because I've known Will since high school. So now, when we first met, Leon grew up in the church. I didn't even go to church, but I had God put in my heart, I guess you could say, that I would want the truth. I think I might have mentioned that. Maybe it's from hip hop and questioning things, and not just taking, you start questioning your country and all this stuff. But on the flip side, and in college, I learned about the concept of critical thinking. Actually, in high school, you ever heard that current term? Never heard the idea of critical thinking. Never thought of it. So critical thinking, right? So questioning, getting deeper. So if critical thinking just means not taking something at face value, going a little deeper. And I learned that if I got anything out of college, that concept. So how does that? And if we could apply that to our faith, we'll be stronger in our faith. And thought just came to me. So I recall when Will was on this journey of learning this stuff, and he was starting to introduce me to it, because over the years, we'd be in touch, we'd be out of touch. I mean, we were all done with college by that time, and I probably shortly after that, I was starting to become a believer. And I remember him talking about the synagogue and kind of having some interest, but not really knowing what was going on. I was just new to everything. Everything was new to me. But I remember someone wearing a hat that said Yeshua on it. And I talked to him, and I went to his house, and he got, with his wife, and he talked, and he's a Messianic Jew, I was like, this is really great. And I go back to the person who was basically onboarding me into Christianity and really led me to faith. And I remember him saying, he's like, I don't see a need to call Jesus Yeshua, and thinking back, it's like, it's kind of like, even though he was a non-believer who became a believer, right? So you were a non-believer, now you're a believer, but that's it. You're gone as far as you're going to go, because you don't, and it's just, it's what I appreciate about Leon. If you look at that, he could have easily taken that book and said, whatever, but he had, instead of a critical spirit, or it's a humility, and a desire to learn. And so that's what my MO is. And so again, I can see why people might resist some of this stuff, because for a good number of years, my wife hated it, but I was eating kosher with Leon.
Oh yeah, right.
Oh God, was that a problem? But I could, I used to wrestle, because I need to lose some weight even now. So can I do? And there's some things I can diet, I can make changes, I can do some things, if it's what God wants, and if I'm convicted, right? And so we all have to be on our own spiritual journey. We have to. It's up to us. What do we want to do with it? So that's all. I mean, I'm just so thankful to have Leon, Will, as a brother, and someone who's can answer so many questions that I have and anyone else has, because he's been able to study these things. And so, I don't know if it'll be a Q&A, but just to say, that's why I wanted to put this out, as we talked about. Let's start getting some of these things out there, and they're out there, and you can find them in other venues, just like Leon has online. And really, it's because of online that he's been able to really study. I guess back in the day, you'd just been at the library or some kind of Christian bookstore, but now instead of books, we can see videos and stuff. So yeah, that's really the reason for this series. Is just, like I said, to make Jesus Jewish again, the authentic. Because what's the point? And I've always thought, as long as the thought came into my mind, is if we're asking a non-believer to come to faith, we're asking them to do that and to make all these changes. Shouldn't we as believers be open to getting deeper in our faith? Are we is the idea just to get baptized and call it good and then go get some other people baptized? Or is it to really, because like what Will's talking about when we say, where it is in scripture, it says, Lord, Lord, and it's like, I did not know you. And, that's pretty convicting. And it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm baptized, but is that a relationship, And so we want to always, and that thought, it's like, I got to be working on my relationship. And it can feel like, for me, an abstraction, and life can be tough to reconcile our schedules and stuff. And Will was given that, the blessing, what's the blessing? The blessing of life still on earth. And oh no, I can't find a job. Oh darn, I'm just going to have to learn more than I've ever learned about God Almighty, So that's turning a negative into a positive. That's kind of why, that's why I just I want more people. And so Will himself is like, hey, I'm just a conduit we want to get around other people who grew up Jewish and understand all these things for generations. And so that's our heart, but we just do it as life allows and as the desire allows. That's kind of why I thought it'd be good to put some of this stuff out there, and there'll be more to come. Just a little taste, the Easter, the 3 days. I'm just saying it because we've had a discussion about 3 days, day and a half. We're going to do that maybe next Easter, So, but there's plenty of material. There's no end to it. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this. I don't know if you have anything else.
No, yeah, I think that you've covered it. But I think, that one verse that you were talking about when Yeshua said that I don't know if he said the last days, but there's going to be people that are say, I did this in your name, I did that in your name. And he's going to say, I don't know you. You're a worker of lawlessness. And so to me, it's very interesting. And not just that, but there's the other place where he talks about the broad and narrow path, and that many people find the broad path, which leads to destruction, and very few find the narrow path. And at least for me, one thing I think about is that you have Christianity, which is like, I don't know if it's the largest religion on the face of the earth. However, he says that there's a narrow path and not that many people find it. So to me, there's kind of like a very interesting juxtaposition of, if you look at it from this Christian perspective, that a lot of people are Christians, but in his word, he said that there's going to be a narrow path. Not everyone's going to find it. So maybe expanding that a little farther, what does that mean for me? Am I on the broad path or the narrow path? Which one am I on? If I'm on the broad path, then he's going to say, depart from me, I don't know you. But even if you say that I've done this in your name and done that in your name, he's going to say, I don't know you, but what would be the criteria for that? It's a very interesting thing to think of. And then the narrow path, not as many people find that, but finding that path will have a not reconciliation, but will have an acknowledgement of you. So I think that's like a very interesting dynamic, those two verses where they're almost opposed to each other. But the one thing that maybe there's more to it than just kind of like what you just mentioned, that just getting saved and being baptized, and that there's more to being a disciple of him than just that. And that's going to put one on the narrow path be challenges and obstacles. However, like what he says, there's life at the end of that. Being on the broad path, everyone's there. It's easy, but at the end, you're gonna hear, "Depart from me, I don't know you." So,
And
something interesting.
you hear the gnashing of teeth comment too.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so the other, and it's, I guess, because I was trying to find the Lord's Prayer, but I came across where Jesus says it's a prayer of thanksgiving in Matthew 11, I think it is, and he's just talking about, you know, the people who are so smart and they know everything versus, you know, the people who are have the childlike faith. It's not like it's the humility, I think, you know what I mean? And so and we see that even in the Christian world, you know, and that's why the more educated you are in Christianity, it's almost harder to reconcile some of these new truths on some level, because you've kind of committed yourself. But something to think about. I mean, hopefully we all have a humble spirit. I feel like it's serving me well as I go through life, and meaning that I don't know everything. You know what I mean? I hope I never say things like, you know, whatever. I just want to have an open spirit. You know, obviously discernment's important. We got to be discerning, you know, but everything that Leon Will shares with me, I just can't, it just, I mean, I'm open to having debates and discussions too. If we want to go and have a discussion, that'd be fun. We can live stream it. Anyone who's up for that, let's do it, because we just want to learn and better ourselves, and not be, you know, in a place where we are unknown to our Creator. So that's my goal for myself, and for I would say the same thing, I believe. And anybody who else wants to come along for the journey, let's do it. It's going to be great. Okay, well, signing off for now. Enjoy the series, and we'll see you around.